very honored to be asked by Christina and Teresa to be part of this because so many of these artists I admire or have shared space with or have worked together on different things. There's a bit of an ELAC undercurrent too, you know, like Star had a wonderful show there and we worked together on a group crit, like during the pandemic actually, and we had photo crit, which was fun. Oh, hey, you were part of it, you know? And of course, Christopher, we worked very closely for many years on Laura Aguilar's project, and so I'm just so honored to be part of this so we could talk about your practices in the context of El Cuerpo, but also I think for me as someone who thinks a lot about this field of US Latinx art, right, and the institutionalization of it, where do we situate these practices and how do they speak more broadly to the field, right? And so we were talking about format, like how to address including all of your voices, and we were thinking, oh, maybe we could do 2 groups, and the more I thought about it, there's just so many wonderful intersections with each of your practices that I thought instead, let's try to talk about themes, and folks will all be welcome to participate. I have some specific questions, but others are more open-ended, and I really kind of welcome that for whoever feels on their spirit that moment to respond. So we could talk about your works in this show, but also more broadly your practices. So the 4 kind of themes that I was thinking of course, starting off with El Cuerpo, this exhibition, and thinking about the performing body, the photographic stage. I love those terminology on its own. But also Los Angeles geographies, topologies, you know, placemaking, all these words that speak to place, and the multiplicities of experiences that we know we have in this place. Los Angeles broadly construed, right? Thinking of the broader Los Angeles, thinking of Los Angeles County, thinking about even Southern California. We're missing William Camargo from our panel, you know, our OC representation. So definitely thinking about the intersections right across the region, as well as thinking about family and community. How does that manifest in the practices? How do you bring folks into your work? Or how do your family and friends support your work? And finally, because there's several of you that have practices as educators, whether it be formally or informally, arts education, community arts education, or faculty, I'd love to talk about how that's shaped the practices as well. So that's our preface, and we'll have time for folks to talk and have Q&A at the end as well. So beginning with El Cuerpo, this exhibition here, which is a beautiful show. I mean, I'm glad that we're all here, you know, and we can also point to different works while we talk about them. I believe this theme is very rich, you know, thinking about the photographic stage, performativity. I know in the description of the show, there's different artists and moments referenced, you know, from the No movies produced by Osco to thinking about staging oneself. I mentioned Laura Aguilar and someone as well, right? Different generations of artists that have shaped photo practices or lens-based practices in our region. And of course, Christina's work. And I think that that's important to bring to this conversation. You know, Christina's having a moment right now, I feel, with her amazing show that's been traveling nationally. It's still traveling?
Yes.
It's still traveling?
San Jose, right?
San Jose Museum of Art. And how do we also acknowledge our artists while they're with us right now? And so we could start thinking about El Cuerpo. I'm curious, where do you situate yourself within this idea of staging yourself? I've had some conversations with folks about this. Some of the works we see a lot of you, and others they're, I think in ID where it's something that you're trying out in a way. So I'm curious to think about where did the impulse to bring yourself in front of the camera come from? And whether kind of some of the messages or ideas that you're hoping to explore. So feel free to, even if you want to, like, for this question, go down the line and refer to the works here on the show.
Well, I regret sitting right next to him right now, but well, thank you all for coming. My name is Aydinaneth Ortiz. You can call me Aidi. The first 4 letters of my name makes it a little bit easier. I think I had been flirting with the idea of self-portrait for some time, and I never really felt comfortable in front of the camera. But I just felt like it was necessary. It was something that I wanted to do and I wanted to play with and experiment with. And so it started with actually me doing self-portraits that really were not a traditional portrait where you see my face. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm holding hair of mine that I've been collecting. I call them my little hairballs, which there is a hairball there. So I have quite a few of them since then. So the first kind of iteration of the self-portrait I did maybe 3 years ago, and it's been leading up to it. And I just wanted to allow myself, I guess, a little bit of freedom to experiment versus working in the way that I normally traditionally work in, which is a little bit more documentary in style. But I do love portraiture. So if I'm asking a stranger to be in front of the camera, I had to turn the lens to myself, as uncomfortable as that was. But I'm really happy with it, and I'm actually going to try to rope my mom into it. She's here, I haven't told her yet. So we can do this together. So it'll be really great. But yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. My name's Arlene Mejorado, and thinking about your question, Joseph, I have worked for a long time in more of the documentary practice, and then also, which comes with a lot of portraiture and kind of, building an intimacy and connection to others through portraiture. And with some of my more recent work in the last 3 years, I started kind of inverting the lens in terms of making work that felt a lot more personal to me, and work that was actually derived from personal stories and also from experiences within my family. And so all of the work that's in this show is really sourced from family stories. And so for me, as I was making the photograph behind me, which is called Sitting at the Median, with that one, I had been making photographs where I was working in these large wide medians throughout the San Fernando Valley. And it was sourced through a family story by my cousin about playing in the median when she was little, and she didn't realize that's not a playground, obviously, but I thought that was really interesting in the lens of a child, like how you would read this like patch of grass as a place where you can play. And so I started making a lot of work at the median, but I was photographing outwards, and I started paying attention to my body, and I thought, this is extremely uncomfortable for me to be working in the median where there's obviously traffic, and although I'm on grass and I'm on land, I didn't feel grounded in it. And then I started to think about that as like kind of a perpetual feeling that I already live with, of like perpetually feeling like uncomfortable and like unbelonging and not finding my place. And so I thought about this in-between or liminal space in the street as that. And so I thought, well, I'll just photograph that itself, and there was no way where to turn to other than my own body. So that's when I decided to make this image. And there's not a lot of photographs in which I step into the frame, but it's starting to happen more and more because I'm starting to feel like I have turned to many places to make photographs, and now it seems like it's just part of my next journey, like looking more inward and using myself as more of the source of what I need to work with right now.
Hi everybody, how you doing? Thanks for coming. I want to thank Christina and Teresa first, right, for putting this together and having us all here.
And
But,
what is your name? I didn't introduce you guys, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Juan Valenzuela.
Sorry.
It's kind of weird. I place myself in photos because for so long there's very few images of me growing up. I don't know why, but there just is. I'm very uncomfortable being in photographs, so I don't like asking people to be in them because I don't like to be asked to be in them. So I force myself to do it, and I was shooting a lot. Specifically, the piece that's in here in the San Gabriel Valley called Mejorado Beach. I shot it for many years without myself in it. I put objects in it that represented me. I was lucky enough to go to La Historia Society in El Monte and was able to see the archive of that space since the 30s or 40s. I was looking at these images, and as soon as I saw the bodies in there, I knew what was missing from these images was myself, right? The body. So I use myself as not only to represent myself, a lived experience, right? But also people who I represent or where I come from, right? Like my lineage, my culture, where I come from, my experience, right? Chicano experience. So that's why I include my body in it, because it's autobiographical about me and the people I believe I come from, right? It's who I'm making my work for, right? To share this experience, right? Which might not commonly be.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name is Christopher Velasco. So to answer your question, Joseph, and to kind of pair off of what everybody was saying, for myself, I've been taking self-portraits for a long time, since I first started like at ELAC in Photo 10. Like, I think our first assignment was self-portrait, and I was kind of nervous because I didn't know what to expect from that. And a lot of my influence comes from cinema. So a lot of like the images I like to create are like characters. So I think of myself as different characters, and you can see in the images in the show, they're different people. They're not necessarily myself, and that's a good way to like protect myself from like actually showing who I really am. But at the same time, it's fun playing dress up, like it's drag, and I think of putting on different characters and outfits and coming up with stories for each of the characters is always fun. And I think that's also great to like, you know, when you're doing self-portraits, it's, how do you say, it's very, it's safe, and it's helped me to create images I don't think I would have seen or done maybe like 20 years ago, and also to like what you're saying too, Juan, like I didn't see images of myself growing up and being like, you know, in my family, everybody was kind of like always demeaning like anybody who was queer or anything like that. So for myself, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do these heroic people, even though like some of the characters are really bad in my stories, but it's just seeing those images of myself, and whether it's like in bad drag or good drag or just like, you know, male presenting, that's like what I find really exciting, doing like putting myself in the image. So yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is James Francisco Garcia. A little nervous, so bear with me. And before I answer your question, I do just want to say that with all this talk about ELAC, I actually dropped out of ELAC, so I'm the one self-taught artist here. But my work is obviously very personal, sort of documenting my family, my home life, sort of the spaces that I occupy, queer cruising spaces. So turning the camera on myself was always a part of that process. It would just make sense to sort of include myself. And then someone had asked me this question actually recently, and I sort of was like looking at why self-portraiture was so much a part of my practice, and then I was thinking about what I was looking at really was really coming into photography, and it was a lot of women who were engaging with self-portraiture, Francesca Woodman or Aguilar. A friend had gifted me a really beautiful book by Laura Latinsky called Venus and Fur. So it's just really was inspired by that, and that just became a part of my practice. And I just try to be as open and honest as much as I can in my work. I mean, clearly the middle photo over there.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, you're representing the new portrait in the group. Do you want to talk about your sexy image here?
Yes, so middle photo, self-portrait that I made at a long-standing bathhouse that has been operating in East Hollywood. I'd been a patron there for many years, and I was sort of like sneaking my camera into these spaces and trying to figure out what kind of image I want to make. And it took a couple attempts of just like taking self-portraits, taking portraits of friends or other patrons, until I finally decided I want a room with the mirrors. I'm gonna hit it with the strobe, and I want this very chaotic composition. And I was very grateful that a friend came to help me sort of release the shutter.
Hello, just want to make sure I don't reverb because I have a very loud voice. My name is Star Montana. I'm trying to think how I can like poise this, right? Because I think a lot of people that then go into conceptual portraiture, self-portraiture, come from a history of a documentary, and that was my journey. I started pretty young with my family and friends. And I don't actually think a lot of my work is self-portraiture. I would say nothing here is self-portraiture. It's performance, but yeah, like, so I did documentary, and I always say this, like, almost all my family has passed away through the systemic genocide of like racist healthcare, genocidal policies with just brown and black people, right? All this stuff. So I was really interested in documenting my family, but once everybody died, I was like, I'm still really interested in telling the stories. So I stepped into the frame. And so, yeah, I don't really consider this self-portraiture. I would say in the two, this is for a new body of work that hasn't been actually, like, it's like a drop of the single of the new album that hasn't been released. But the first album, like this is the second part, was By the River. I stood and stared into the sun. I always have to remember the whole thing. I would say there's two self-portraits, but I come out a lot in it. And so like this one is actually, I'm a stand-in for a lot of the femmes in my family that should be alive but are not alive. So I'm a representation of them, you know, past, present, and the future, if that makes sense. So when I think of self-portraiture, it's like I want to be seen as myself, but in these images I am not myself. I am people that have been systematically genocided, you know? Even today, right now, like, right, we all put on our masks, and I'm a very shy person. The only time you might actually see who I am is if you come to my house and I'm in like my loungewear without makeup. Like if I have makeup on and a really pretty dress and everything like that, then I have a mask on. So I would say like, yeah, this is like not self-portraiture, but it's actually just kind of me stepping into people that should be here and they're not, you know?
Thank you. I'm glad that, I'm glad you all got to answer that question, because I don't think that there's a single, like, unified response, and I really appreciate what you shared, Star, about the performance aspect, in the sense that these images are kind of byproducts of a performance, right? In some cases. And Christopher, I love it. We were talking over email, and I love how you're talking about the art of transformation as well. Because I think not only the queer dimensions, but like the transformation component of making these images is something that you're experiencing, right? And if folks are with you, but we only get these images as the kind of trace or the evidence or portal that allows us to share that with you. And so it's really special to be able to see some of these images, and the way that you're talking about, I really like that transformation. And still talking about this performance thread and images, I'm curious, aside from a kind of conceptual look at them, I'm actually very curious of the practicalities behind it. If you're interested in talking about that, you know, what goes into this process for you? What are some of the issues of staging yourself for others, such as framing, focus, timing, working on your own, working with others? There's a negotiation there, I'm sure. And so, yes, I'm curious and you know, some of you have worked together as well, so if you want to kind of talk about that too, and like what does that look like in practice?
I go first again.
You can pass it too if you don't want to.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna pass it
We don't have to do
when I don't like the question. I'm gonna pass it. Well, I've been very fortunate that I actually have an assistant that helps me, who happens to be sitting on this panel. I'm not gonna point at him. And But it's really great when you're able to have another photographer to assist you in your practice. But also thinking about framing and material, I think is a big part of this piece in particular that's kind of behind me, where you can see the signing of the film. I intentionally scanned it in strips so that I can make it as a contact sheet and put it together, and I left some of I guess some of the remnants that drum scanners kind of leave behind when you're getting a scan of that size. And so it's a big part of my process, working with film, because I felt that it slowed me down as a photographer, where I had caught myself with digital photography, like not even stopping. Like I'm walking and I'm like, oh, take a picture, you know? So I really love film for that reason, and I felt it was a great service to this piece, because I think of it kind of like recording or time capsuling a ritual that I do almost, you know, I don't want to say every day because it takes a long time, so maybe like, you know, 2-3 times a week. Of course, I don't do it outside. I joked around during the opening and I told people I normally do my hair outside, and that was a lie, okay? So if you believe me, I was kidding. But it's a ritual of self-love, and I felt like, you know, allowing the film numbers to stay allowed for you to see the sequence of when this takes place, because we don't normally read things in the format the way that the film is kind of laid out. But I made sure that I captured every single image and didn't digitize it, so I didn't like rearrange it. Like it was very methodical the way that I kind of created this. So it really was, I think, essential to have someone help me, and it really made the process a lot easier for me.
So I have always worked alone, and I think this starts from the beginning of the first kinds of photographs I was making was street photography, because nothing stood in the way of me and a camera being able to just walk. And I think the camera also helped me learn just like how to navigate different kinds of spaces, and sometimes even in my body, like just finding a bit of like safety with like having the camera, in terms of like how I can enter the world. And then, so I feel like there's still some level of that in the work I'm doing now. I mean, all the images I did here were more like medium format, but I set my camera up on sticks, and kind of like what Heidi was saying, it slows down the process. You're working with a tripod or with the camera. I like set a timer on my phone just to check the composition, and so it's a tedious process. There are moments that I've looked back and said, like, why don't I just get help, like ask someone to help me? So, but you know, usually like if I work with people, like they're a part of the performance of the work in front, and it's and part of the staging. So they're there, but I've always worked, you know, kind of on my own. And I really welcomed kind of slowing down. And I think also part of the performance, not just what's in front of the lens and the end result of the photograph, but also the act of making, the act of doing the photo. You are kind of, it feels a bit of like putting yourself more on the line, which I kind of welcome in the level of risk in making my work. Like if I'm out on the street, and a lot of my work is about, there's a level of intervention. Like I feel like placing myself in the landscape, and working with the camera, it's you're vulnerable as well, and so that is happening, and that's a part of the cost of making the work and making the image. There is that element of how you're engaging with the space and entangling yourself more into the landscape. So that's also part of it.
I'll kind of mimicking what others said. I started alone, and like she said, I'm very fortunate to have a partner who understands kind of what I do. So we talk a lot about when I ask for her how to go shoot or something, so she can have an idea of what I want and then what I'm looking for, right? And we use similar equipment, right? So large format, it's hard to set up a large format 8x10 camera and work alone. So it's almost, you need somebody kind of watching your back too when you're using such big equipment, right? I need help carrying all this stuff, right? Because it's very physical, right? In the place I'm going to, we gotta, you know, kind of put it in. But that was kind of the past with film. I was predominantly film-based, right? Analog. And recently, because of just a time constraint, I switched over to digital, and I was fortunate enough to use a very high quality medium format digital camera, which completely changed the whole process for me, right? It's almost immediate now, right? By the time I was done shooting, in a half an hour I was done, right? Ready to print. The technology is amazing now, but I do feel it's something I have to get used to, right? That process, because there's some, I don't know why we do it to ourselves. We still shoot film, send it out, and edit. Every time I'm editing something, I tell myself, why am I still doing this? Why do I still do this? Right? When does it matter? You know, at the end of the day, it's just something that I do for myself, right? But I'm kind of in between now. I've embraced digital now, but I'm still, the next thing I'm working on is still large format, so that's where my heart's at. You know, when my heart wants what the heart wants. If it's good for me or not, right? But that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Yeah, so a lot of my work, I started alone, and then eventually I would have people help me. Like, I would have to direct them how to shoot the image for me and like make the composition for me. So I was like being director and star at the same time. But it took more recently to when I got my husband, who's in the front row. He actually helped me, and I had to teach him how to take pictures. Like, I really had to teach him how to like look at the camera, do this, do that, like everything. And so when we did our work together during the pandemic, especially because one of the images is the crystal image, we did everything in the pandemic. Our studio was our apartment, and we set up everything. Like, we go to 99 Cent Store, rest in peace. So we got a lot of equipment there. I used a lot of like toy cameras, Polaroids. I used any kind of camera. I didn't care about like high quality. I wanted it because I pre-visualized how the image was going to look. And then once it was created, then I would spend hours editing because it had to look a certain way, whether if it was going to be black and white or color. Then I would see, okay, how is the image going to present on Instagram, especially? And then I thought about the print, and then how it's going to be framed. So it was like this whole like step-by-step process, and then eventually, like once it came out, then I moved on to something different. But yeah, a lot of my methods is always like, what materials do I have around me? Is it gonna look good in color, black and white, a Polaroid, digital, film? I'm like, I'll do it all just to see, and I'll try it all. And then if something doesn't work, I scrap it and I go on to like something different. But I'm like with most of you guys, I went digital and I was fighting with it too. I didn't care for digital, but then I took some like master printing class. Remember, what's his name from Freestyle? Eric? Yeah, Eric. I took a master printing class with him, and then it changed my life about digital. So now I'm like primarily digital, but then I still like doing the mixed media, and I get in trouble with that. But yeah, so that's like my process. So.
Hello. I mean, my process is pretty slow and organic, and it takes sort of multiple attempts. I mean, especially with these images here, sort of like trying to recreate these memories or personal rituals of family, sort of coercing family members to get in front of the camera. I mean, it really is a collaboration at the end of the day with them, just because I'm thinking about sort of their gestures, their actions, things that we do on a regular basis, and then asking them to be vulnerable enough to sort of recreate that with me in front of the camera. I mean, the one at the end with me and my dad wrestling, I've been trying to make that image for years. You know, my stomach was flatter, now our beer bellies are about the same. But I think I'm not using the camera just to sort of document a performance. I really care about the image, and that's why it sort of takes multiple attempts and a lot of. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I mean, I sort of navigate two separate spaces where I'm like working with my family to create these images, but then I can also go out and do street photography and sort of be on my own. But it's a balance.
So, I feel like if you would go to my Instagram, like early on, like there's always like pictures of me with my family, like documentary, like it's always been like a family affair with me and my process. I would say especially with my medium format camera, I'm like openly disabled. Like it's really hard for me. I have a messed up back because of photography and just bad legs. So like it's just really funny that like almost everybody in my family, my brother, my sister-in-law, my partner, my nephew a little bit, but he's like at that really cranky teen stage. They all know how to use my camera because they all help me. So like everyone's always helped me, like and everyone kind of knows like what to do, like when we're doing stuff, whether it be me and my brother posing for a certain image. Rest in peace, my grandma. My grandma always thought she was like really ugly. But I remember I was just like asking her to take a portrait with me or take a portrait like, yeah, of me or together. And like, so she like, you know, took a picture. I feel like my family for a really long time, except for my brother, really didn't understand what I was doing, but they're like, okay, let me help you use the camera. So yeah, I feel like there's like an idea that the photographer's life is really lonely, and in some aspect it is. I think like the editing, like doing certain things, that part's really lonely, but I don't think the process for me is lonely, and I'm sort of glad in that way. Like I think for this series, it's been really communicative. Like I've had to throw myself in bodies of water, and that's like, you know, sometimes it's a little dangerous, so we have to pre-game it, like whether it be my partner or my art partner, and like we'll be like, okay, we set up the shot and we know how to do it, and both of them know how to do it, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna throw myself in the water, and like we have towels ready, like we have everything ready, like we have clothes for after, because usually like the water smells, and not just like the LA River, like any water, right? Like you'll smell like a wet dog after. And like, so like I have everything ready, right? So I'm like, okay, it's time to throw myself in the water. And it's just like a whole communicative process. And I feel like I don't want to touch my camera after I'm super wet. And I think like, yeah, it has to be like communicative for my process in that way, you know? But like then after scanning it and hating the work and thinking about, like that's all very like isolating, you know? But then I go back to my family, they're like, oh no, I like this one. You know, like they're like, they know, like they're like, no, this is the one. And I feel like even this shot, I didn't like it at first. And they're like, no, you're crazy, this is the one. So it's like, you know, like they're very like on it, you know? And I appreciate that, you know? So for me, I'm glad I have that, and they're just like so used to it. Where they're like, okay, do you want to throw yourself in a body of water today? I'm like, no, not today. I'm not like really in the mood today, you know? Like, but they're like, whatever, you know? And I talked to them later about it, and they're like, oh, it makes sense. You know, like when it all comes together, like, oh, it makes sense, whatever weird thing you're doing today. You know, so I feel like that's how it is, like at least with the people that understand it, you know? But, yeah.
Well, I think maybe keep the mic right there for now, because I want to jump kind of forward, because I had a whole section on family, and we hit it now, so I'd rather just kind of strengthen that a little. And I would love to hear, for those who have incorporated family members in your work, or whether family serves as either inspiration or subject in your work, what has that been like? You know, I've talked to a couple of you about like, and you mentioned it as well, like the hesitancy sometimes for family members to be incorporated in that process. Sorry, it sounds like yours are full in now, you know, which is really kind of lovely to hear. And you know, when I walked in for the opening of the show, like James, you were the one artist I hadn't seen or heard of in a while, and I was like, oh my god, like I was so touched to see your images, you know, with your mom and your dad. So I would love to hear, you know, not to necessarily put you on the spot, but if you want to talk about, like, I'm sure that's been a whole process to incorporate them in your work.
I mean, my parents have been very supportive of me from a very early age. They never really forced me to do anything that I was never interested in. And we just have a very traditional family unit. They always make sure to tell us that they love and support each other, support both me and my sister. So they never really questioned me wanting to be an artist. They never really questioned why I'm bringing them in front of the camera. Now that I'm sort of bringing them more into these spaces, they can kind of understand it more. I brought them to the opening for the first time, which was really special. My dad sort of fantasizes about like the grand painters and writers sort of like at these salons talking all night, and he came to the opening, he's all like, oh, he's all like, this is what you do all the time. This is like the modern interpretation of that. So it's been wonderful with my family. And I think that's why I document them so much, just because me and personally, I always try to bring friends, close friends, people to come into our space to sort of experience that closeness, and the work just became an extension of that. I recently had a bunch of photographer friends over for like an informal crib, and that was very special for me to have photographers, friends be in that space with me. And I think people really understood what I do more, a little bit better, just being a part of that. So I mean, I'm always going to be documenting my family, how things change as I get older, you know, what is the dynamic going to be like in my images if I move out eventually or something tragic happens. So I'm always constantly going to be making work about them and having their support.
I think it's how do you say, like, it's just me and my brother and our immediate family, and we have a very close relationship. Like, we've always kind of understood everything that's sort of happened to our family. We were just talking about it right before I came in. But then there's my nephew who's 14 now, and I watch a lot about like the toxicness of like mommy vloggers, you know, like, which it'll come full circle. And so I tell my nephew, like, do you want me to show the work about you? Like, I don't photograph him right now because he's like, I don't want you to take, he doesn't even let me like take pictures. I don't, for social media, like, or barely even myself. I'm like, he graduated middle school and, you know, he's like, no pictures. I was like, I'm not gonna post it on social media. I'm like, can I have one for myself? He's like, one for yourself. And I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna post it on social media. And so like, I asked him, like, does it bother you? Like the pictures from when you were young? And he's like, I don't care. I'm like, oh, like, so I think about those because he's autonomous, like he's a human, like what's going on with him. But he doesn't really talk to me about those things because he's just like, I don't want to talk about anything, you know, like don't bother me. So I think about those things, you know, because I'm like, you know, I want to respect what your privacy is, like what's going on, like you are a part of this family, like I think a lot about like children's rights, like in terms of like when I was young, like my mom would say like, you don't have rights, you're my child. And then when I turned 18, she's like, well, you're still my child, you don't have, I'm like, what? Like, what is going on, you know? And I just don't believe that, you know? So I think a lot about that in terms of family, you know? Like, I don't want to like him to like grow up and be like, I don't want to be in the work. So I asked him like, how do you feel about it? He's like, I don't care. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what, you know? Yeah. So I'm like, I respect that. I'm like more private about him and stuff like that. And that to me, you know, is important. But in terms of the whole history of the work and everything like that, I'm like, okay, this is the family, this is what happened. So you can know everything that happens. Because sometimes he's like, where's our family? What happened? And I'm like, well, I actually can tell you these things. And I used to have the same questions as you. So in that way, it's like, at least I'm more informed, but I also care about his rights and all the other little kids' rights in my family. Because I'm like, I always felt like, you know, I was not autonomous, so I was not treated equally or had any types of civil rights in my family, you know? So it's more complicated, you know what I mean? And that's where I think about the mommy bloggers where they're like all blowing up their kids and all that. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do any of that, you know?
I think, I don't know. If
Yeah, I was gonna say something, yeah. I only thought it was fair to photograph my family and especially my parents because they did it as much as when I was a kid. So it's like, you know, getting back
Take
into,
back.
payback, but no, I'm just kidding. Because I'm the only child, so I don't have any brothers, sisters. I had a lot of cousins growing up, but then we all lost touch. So like the two photographs I have here, the one especially of me and my dad, like the before and after, that was just like wanting to understand like their memories and what memories mean to them in photographs. So I wanted to try to understand that, and then doing that process, I realized those are their memories and not mine. And then my photographs are actually my memories of like a time gone by. So, and then going to the other image of my Aunt Marge, like that series alone was like, I didn't even know I had an aunt. And then when I found out my dad's like saying that he had this aunt who died on the 6th Bridge,
Yeah.
and I was like, can you tell me more? And they're like, no, the family doesn't talk about it. And we, to this day, we still don't know what happened, because a lot of like my grandmother and other family members of that era just like passed away. So they, like nobody knows, so it's kind of lost. And then I found out some family members didn't like that I did this series, because especially querying like the landscape with me doing drag, they freaked out because they were like, oh, you're discriminating against her. And I was like, you don't even know her, I don't even know her. And I go, this is the only way to do it, because who else am I gonna get to stand in? So it's like my legacy of just saying I'm in this shot because I'm doing the drag. And there's no pictures of her, so I just had to go to some thrift store and like find clothes that represented 1950s.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, whatever. And then the hair was, it's in black and white, but like the color images are disturbing to me because they look really garish. And then like the red hair I put, then the white makeup, and I was like, okay, we're just gonna go in ghost story. But at the same time, like, I think nowadays, I don't really put a lot of my family into my work anymore because it's more about myself. But if it's about my family, I'll have like a little extension of like a photo of them or something in there to kind of represent that now. Because I think with like doing, like using the family, I think it's kind of like, you know, for me, it's kind of moving on and kind of like growing up. Because like, I don't want to photograph my parents now, because I think it would just be heartbreaking to see like their transformation. Like as they get older, it hurts. And then putting it on film or digital or however, it would just break my heart. Because it's like, you know, seeing them from what they were once when I was younger to now, it's like, it hurts. So that's why I'm just gonna put the camera onto myself. So, and if I look crazy or whatever, it's fine because it's me. So it's safer that way.
I'm actually I think I've been working around my family a lot, but excluding them personally, right? They are not in the images. It's usually something that belongs to them, or something that we do together, right? Whether it be in the kitchen or something that belongs to my father, right? Or his things that I think that really are unique to him in making. So I like shooting that a lot. My son, I've been shooting. He's my son, and those of you who are parents know I've shot him forever. Where he got to an age where he was like, I think 2 or 3, and he started putting his hand in front of the camera because he stopped. He didn't like it anymore. So I respected that, right? It's his little body and it's up to him. So I stopped shooting him for the longest time. It broke my heart, right? But it's what he wanted. When he got older, I would say around 7 or 8, he got a little bit better with it, so I started shooting him again. He's like my camera tester. And then I've been doing this so long that I really like his images of me and him or just him, right? And I didn't like him before because he's very uncomfortable in the images. He's really fucking pissed off. Like he doesn't want to be because I'm forcing him to do it. So he's not looking at the camera or he's shaking his head, right? And those are the ones that now when I go back and I have so many of them now, those are the ones I like the most, right? I don't know what I think they're mainly for me. I'm thinking about kind of showing that kind of stuff because I like the relationship show between me and him. But that's where I am with family. I exclude them on purpose just because I know they don't like to be. You know, they're supportive of what I do, you know, and they know I'm making work about them, but I think they appreciate that they don't have to be in it. Right? Yeah. But that's changing.
Becky, really quickly, I know that you don't have images here of your family, but that you've had a lot of projects that are totally throwing them in too. So if you want to talk,
Yeah,
but circle back.
Are we gonna take like an intermission or something? But okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'll try to be quick. So I, like every photographer that I think here, I think you always have a camera in your family space, whether it's like a digital camera, your cell phone. It's like, so they were used to me having a camera in their face at all times that they just completely ignored it. It wasn't until I decided to make a book that it was about the death of our youngest brother and my schizophrenic brother. So it was kind of dealing with both of those things, and the book is actually here if you do want to check it out. Well, so it was about us. It was about my family, and I did it really for myself. It was very cathartic. It was helping me deal with the loss of my sibling. And then when I was done with it, I was very proud of it. I was very proud of how, when I would show someone how they received it. And then I was asked to have it in the museum exhibition, and I remember I asked my family, like, can I show this? It's not just my life, it's your life. And they said yes, not really knowing what it was, what that meant, because I think like prior to that, I had only shown like the little galleries, coffee shops, just as a young artist starting out. And then here I am in this museum, and then there's no turning back after that. So there was a moment that they shied away from me. Like I noticed a shift, and I respected that. So I kind of stopped pointing the camera directly in their face, and they're coming to terms with it now. That's why I'm telling my mom the whole brand. Haven't told her yet where she's at. She's somewhere with me. So it's different now though, because I feel like that was such a tragic event in our life, so it was really hard, and it was hard to share that to the world. But now I'm at a point where I'm trying to tell different stories that aren't so tragic and aren't so sad. And but they're still a great part of my work and my practice, and I really appreciate all the support that they've given me.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the reason I skipped over Arlene real quick is because I have a coupled question for Arlene and Star, which is thinking more about how, on one end, the staging that happens. I'm thinking of the wall on the back of Arlene's work, but also the ways that you all are thinking and using older photographs, right? Whether they be family photographs or not, but incorporating that in your practice. And so I'll preface it and then pass it, because I would really love to hear about what you're comfortable sharing about what it means to repurpose or integrate these existing images in your work. And Star, we overlapped a little bit in at USC, and like some images I've seen you, especially of your mom, I think like I've seen you use them in different bodies of work, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what does it mean to return to an image or repurpose it or do a different treatment to it, right? And what are the types of things that are motivating you to do that?
Want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because when you first initially asked about the involvement of family, I was thinking about the archive, because, before, like, I owned a coffee table book, I owned a family album, right? And so those are my first lessons in photography, were what I saw in these photo albums. And that's my first introduction to what portraiture is and what it can do. And so studying my own archive and family archives and different households with archives, I started to look at thinking about agency in photographs, and even in our own family archive, we can think about agency in terms of like, when is someone ready to present themselves in front of the camera, and when is there like a point of pride in their presence in front of the camera, and when are they withholding or denying the camera. And I've seen images of like my own mother where she is dressed to her T, she's dressed to the nine, like the best outfit, and she is posing for the camera. And I've also seen pictures of her where like someone caught her off guard, and she's like kind of putting her hand to the camera. And so I was thinking about, like, I always want to make photographs with people that want to be photographed and are ready to be photographed and want to be in front of the lens. And so engaging with my family, a lot of times it starts with conversations at the table. We talk about stories, and then those start to become visual to me. And I think I'm working with sometimes with like the untaken photograph, like moments and stories, but we don't have the photograph. And so the performance, it becomes like a playground of like where we can kind of source from these untaken moments, but they're living memories. And so it's a way to almost like create them into something tangible. And so like with the image of, I remember drawing on my father's back, it's, I worked with a friend his name's Freddie, and he always, like, he would hear stories about my dad, and he would always say, like, if they ever make a movie about your dad, I want to play him. And I was like, well, like, this is the closest we're gonna come to for now, you know, and so I wanted to, like, kind of remember what it felt like as a kid when I would do this one thing, you know, and there's no memory, like, there's no image of it, and, you know, there's, or really too much documentation of my relationship with my dad. So I wanted to use that as the moment to kind of create a stage and a moment where I could like kind of remember what that might have been like. And to my surprise, there were things I remembered that I had forgotten. Of course, I tend to like compress the intimacy and interior with exterior. When you're talking about, I think the 2 images of handling a mother's archive, those are my cousins, and I asked them to go through their mother's archive and like handle those photographs and pick out their favorite images of their mom. So this is also like in a way about futurity and like queer futurity, like myself as like a queer person in my family, where, you know, we take moments of like, you know, because the camera can also create a very hierarchical like situation in a household of like who gets documented or like who's centered in a photograph. And so by working with family, like I feel like, and especially young people in my family, I mainly work with the youth, you know, you get to kind of reorient that power a little bit, or like resituate the family order a bit. And I think that that's been my role so far in terms of like, and also having a stake in the future. Like I think of like, I read a lot of like Jose Esteban Munoz, and he talks about that, about like, you know, what is the stake in the future? Like how do we do that as queer people? And I think about that with the ways that we get to reintroduce our archives and handle them and then create new moments. Yeah, you know, new memories.
My brain feels like it's gonna explode, because like when I think about like archival images and like intertwining it, I'm like, oh my god, there's like too much to talk about, you know? I wrote a little bit of like my master, I don't know, is it a dissertation? Like my master's on it. So I like get like overwhelmed because I'm like, where do I begin?
I read it too, it's good.
So I think I'll just like begin with like how like the emotional part. I always say like I'm a indigenous Mexican person in diaspora, especially when people are like, oh, you're not Mexican enough. I'm like, you're right, I'm not, whatever, I don't care. I'm in diaspora, I've been in diaspora. We're poor people that are always in diaspora, right? So we're always on the move. And why that's important to the archive is when you're on the move and you're poor, usually you pack really shitty, right? And why that's also important to the archive is when you pack really shitty, your shit gets fucked up, right? And my family shit has always been fucked up. That includes the archives, right? And so, like, I can just think of one of the first times I thought about including the archive. I mean, I've always been thinking about that. Is we moved when I came back from New York to this really little shitty house, and we didn't have storage, whereas the other house we had storage. And my family has this tendency of buying those stupid bins from Target after, and I can like just visually seeing it, the Christmas ones with the red and the green to put our outside storage, but when the sun hits it, it breaks, right? Now I've made them buy the Costco ones, the black and the yellow that don't break, the construction ones, big difference, right? But we have all our archival images in there, right? And some of them, when it broke and it rained during one of like the times it actually rained in California, a lot of archival images got destroyed. And I remember I just like fucking lost it. Like I just like had like a meltdown because I remember it was really important images to me. And I remember it was about 30 images and I just looked at them and they were just all white. Like they were all just images. And again, all my family's passed away. And I just remember looking at them, and they had dried in the sun. And I was like, this is fucking insane. And I just wanted to yell at my dad. I was like, this is why it's important for this shit to be inside, blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, this is insane, you know? And so I was like cleaning everything out, and I was letting them dry more, because I was like, do I keep these images? There's nothing on them. It's a blank memory. And then it just reminded me of diaspora. And I found images like that one that were destroyed by the rain, but not entirely. And then I just thought about all the times my family would show me images that were half destroyed, but that they had kept and loved. And that was the only image they had. And I thought about how being poor and being constantly in diaspora, that these are sort of like your memories, right? That your memories when you're just always struggling, that they're not very crystal clear. Like maybe you remember your grandmother, but it's kind of hazy. And it's this fucked up image. Is it more important than the image to the left of it that's so clear and beautiful, right? Is the hierarchy, right? Like what's the difference between that one? Is this how I remember my mother, or would I remember like the one to the left? And I started to really think about that, right? Because I have like all these images in diaspora that are destroyed because we have been poor for so many generations and everything like that. And I was like, no, these are memories and they need to be in the work, because this is what shows our history, right? And it was so important to me, and I started to really think about that. And so I started to think about the ones that have been damaged by water, because we don't have storage, because we're poor, because, right, the systems and everything, that's what I'm saying, like it's so deep, right? And I was just like so angry, you know, but it came from that, you know. And this isn't the exact image, it was an image of me as a little girl, but that's actually how I felt, right? It was like a destroyed, my mom used to always make me really pretty, and I hated that because I felt really ugly inside. So when I found that destroyed image, I was like, oh, this is actually how I really felt, you know? But other images were not. Like, I was like, I want that goddamn image of me and my mom. I want an image of me as a baby. I want that image of my mom young, you know? And so it's like, I started to think about that. Like, I'm gonna put these images in here that are destroyed because it talks more about my life than these pristine images, you know? And more about our plight and everything like that. So, you know, I'm trained like an ELAB. I could not maybe fix this one, but I could fix one a little bit better. But I'm like, I'm gonna fix this image because it's like exactly how I felt, you know? So I get worked up on it because it's like, I have so many friends that have images like that maybe barely have a semblance of somebody in their family, but this is what happens, right? Intersectionality, right? So poverty. So that's really kind of how it came, was just me having a nervous breakdown one day, like post-rain, you know?
Thank you for sharing, because I feel like those were like the two threads that we didn't really address yet. And I do want to be cognizant of time, but I still have two main questions to ask. And so maybe we could, I'll consolidate the ones I wanted to ask about Los Angeles and geographies. And I think part of why I want to talk about this is when we look through these images, like whether you know it or we talk and ask and learn about the location, like so many of these images are speaking to place and specifically to where we're at here right now. And also these other places beyond we're in downtown LA right now, but we're seeing places east of East LA and in here, you know, for me as someone who works at this intersection physically at my museum where I work, right, is East LA meets San Gabriel Valley. I'm always thinking, I live in Whittier now, you know, I'm always thinking of this sprawl. And I'm curious, like, how does Los Angeles play a role in your work, whether it's a subject or an influence? And I'm gonna pass it first to Juan, because I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the Mejorado beach and that image right here on the wall. That is so epic as far as you returning to a site. I know you did touch a little bit, but I would love to hear about that. And something's going off, I don't know. Here we go.
The name of that place it goes by a lot of different names. So to locals, it's Mejorado Beach, which those of you who don't know, it's translates to Hog Beach, right? There's different theories. Nobody really knows for sure of why they call it that. One of the ones that I think is the most talked about is it was a gentleman who owned the land in the 30s who had pig farm, and there was a big flood up the river. It's off of a spike off of the San Gabriel River, and the river is actually called the Rio Hondo, right, which translates to Deep River. And it's in the city of El Monte, and it's off Rosemead and San Gabriel Boulevard. So the theory of that name is that in a big flood, the pigs drowned and washed up and banked up on that beach, right? That's one. The second is back in the days, pools were segregated and they didn't allow people of color to swim in them except for Tuesdays, right? The day they washed and changed the water. So it was in proximity to people on the east side in San Gabriel Valley to visit that place because of freeways weren't as dominant, or people didn't have access to them, right, to the beach. So it's where a lot of people of color went, brown people specifically, to, it was a recreational area, right? It wasn't really deep enough to swim, but it was a place where they would go, right? Rio culture is very big, right, for Mexicans, right? We all have it in our kind of mother countries and stuff like that. So it's a place where they can go, and it's free, right, to cool off, because our home didn't have air conditioning. My home still doesn't have air conditioning, right? 1928 home, right? So it's where they would go kind of congregate and find community, right? There's stories that I had heard of this place growing up. For me, it was something different than it originated from, right? That's why I kind of keep on visiting this site. For me, it was a place we went our teens to smoke, and you took your partner to make out and drink, right? It was that space where we hung out, right? We always knew it as Mejorado Beach. Kind of looking into more of the history, looking up, I went to the Historia Society in El Monte, and looking at their archive and talking to them, I found out it was Camp Hicks, right? It was a walnut grove where there was people there in little shanty towns and shacks where people used to kind of live and pick, right? But it's always been a space where the same kind of person, just different generation, have been visiting, right? And I grew up in Pico Rivera and Whittier, so the San Gabriel Valley, Southeast LA is very dear to my heart, right? Because it's something that's on the outskirts, especially those two rivers, right? San Gabriel and the Rio Hondo, right? People think of the LA, and the LA River is cool and beautiful, but it's paved. Like, I would take my San Gabriel River, Rio Hondo, anything. I don't know if you guys get to look at it, it's just still natural running, right? It's dammed up with the Whittier Narrow Dam by the Army Corps of Engineers, but it's still a place that not too many people visit. I've been kind of shooting it, but it's normally dry, right? But the rains we've been having these last 2 years have brought a lot of water to it, and they're opening up the dam, the Santa Fe Dam actually, that feeds into that. So there's water in it. So I've never seen it so full in my life. So I kind of made it a point to go and document it with this water and put myself in the water, right? And what's interesting now is it's outside in the parking lot. It's like a cruising spot, right, with little trails where people kind of hook up. But once you go in, it's true. And once you go in more into the actual, to the river, to the beach area, the people you see use it now are equestrian, ranchero men, vaqueros, right, who train their horses and ride there, right? So it's interesting to me that this place was kind of established in youth because of lack of access, right? To now it's like, who owns horses, right? You gotta have money to own horses. It's not something like, poor people don't own horses anymore, right? So it's interesting that it's become this place that it's like kind of a new immigrant, a new Mexicano is using this space kind of in a different way, but it's the same exact space, right? It's really no different than him and me, the gentleman in the horse, right? And he had his partner riding behind him. So I think it's interesting how it's kind of come full circle. To me, it's important to document these spaces because I'm a little bit older than a lot of people here, and a lot of younger people have forgotten these areas, right? Or we tend to focus on the big areas that get a lot of attention. And for me, it's important because I have a son, and it's important for me I'm coming at it from a place of historical documentation, right? But I'm also kind of projecting myself in it, to using it. It's not only me, but my ancestors, right? The people who came before me, right? It's basically it. So it's really important to me that the space, that particular space. And then the light boxes, it's just, any typical alley in San Gabriel Valley. I don't know how many people I've had walk up to me and tell me, I know where this is. This is in Maywood. This is in Southgate. This is in Maywood. No, they're all wrong. It's just that familiar, right? This alley with the couch, right? It's very important to me to kind of put our area that's molded me and my identity and how I present, how I perform, right? I'm performing right now, this is all no different than that, right? I mean, it's all of us are doing it, we don't not do it. So it's important for me in that space that made me, right? It's my crib, right? It made me who I am, what I double down on. And also investigate also and kind of research where I come from and why I do the things we do, why we do these performances. It's important for me to do these kind of bodies of work, which all revolve around innovation and so.
I'll go into that. So a lot of my early work was like investigating and dealing with a lot of my trauma growing up. So a lot of the images of like, I grew up in Lincoln Heights, so the pictures especially of like me and my dad, that's like the childhood home I grew up in. And I've had a lot of trauma about that place. So I felt photography was the only way for me to deal with that trauma and not do anything crazy, and a lot of therapy. So after I think after the series I did on my aunt, I think I stopped doing work in like East LA because I felt like I dealt with my trauma. And I kind of wanted to like move on and do other things that I didn't get to do growing up, you know, like for example, doing the drag character and stuff. And then just like doing other photography that's not necessarily like considered Chicano enough or anything, is like messing with like cameras and being more process based was actually really fun. So for me, like location is not as important anymore because I feel like whatever image I take, it's more about me being like where I come from, like, oh, I'm from East LA, then the image just speaks in a different way. But yeah, I'd like to just go off of like a lot of the early, like that piece and the 6th Street Bridge and other images I did at East LA College and even at Cal Arts was like really like trying to deal with trauma. And like the place that I had the most trauma was like, for example, that house. That's like the most trauma. And doing those images, like of going back and re-examining old photographs was like a way to kind of deal with that, let it go, like, yeah, process and it literally like set it on fire. Cause like, I couldn't mess with the original, so I had to scan them and then like copy them. So I made multiple copies and one of them I did destroy on purpose, but I never filmed it. And I think about, should I filmed it? You know, but yeah, so. Huh? I sold it, yeah, I was sold it.
I grew up very sheltered in El Monte. I've lived in the same house my whole life. I'm still there with family. So I always feel like when I come to LA, it was sort of like a different perspective, just because I really didn't start exploring until I like turned 18. So I definitely always, I mean, I don't have urban landscapes in the show, but urban landscape is an important part of my practice. And sort of documenting the greater LA, the San Gabriel Valley, and I love coming into the show at the opening and seeing Juan photos because I knew exactly where that was, that history. And I sort of love he was mentioning the multi-uses of these spaces that were engaging. I mean, even when I'm documenting like queer cruising spaces, like at Alicia Park, it's just sort of like a hangout spot for not even just gay men going to like hook up. It's just like, you see like young straight people drinking, smoking, people just playing music in their car, or like other, you know, photographers trying to get that view of downtown from the 110, and I think that's just sort of an amazing thing to sort of be a part of.
Yeah, does anyone else want to talk about Los Angeles as influence or subject in your work? That's a thing.
So I'm like 4th generation from Boyle Heights, but I'm like not loyal to Boyle Heights in terms of my work. I'm not interested in staying in one place. I live there right now, but I've lived in New York. But in terms of like, I'm not loyal. That sounds like, I mean, it's kind of a better thing to say, but in terms of like, I love to like jump around, and I've always been like the most annoying person in my family, because I've always been really inquisitive. I've never taken their lies for truth. Like, you know, when they're like, oh, so-and-so died of a heart attack, and then I found out later it was an overdose, you know, and stuff like that. I'd be like, how, or why, or, you know. So I was always really inquisitive, and so like, my work is like, I go to because for us, Albani and a few of my families, that was actually the middle class American dream for somebody from Guadalajara. So like, you know what I mean? Like that meant you made it. And two of my family members bought property there, right there on the Rio Grande, or like the Rio Hondo. So I know, like, we would visit them, and we're like, damn, they made it. You know what I mean? And then Whittier was like next, you know, like that, like you really making it in life. You know what I mean? Like, so like I investigate all these places as a way of like, what is it? I mean, I think the American dream is a fallacy. And so, but I'm interested in all these places, I would say in Los Angeles County, in terms of family and what does it mean, and flight and diaspora, and the idea of returning back east, because I feel like at least me and my family, we made it one place, and now a lot of my family is going back east in terms of like just LA County, like Victorville, Ontario, and you know what I mean, and then becoming more conservative. And so I love to investigate things. So I go like everywhere I can. I've also gone up. I'm going back to Texas. I go to New York. I go to Mexico. I'm very interested in like that. But I think it started with LA, and why did they come to LA, right? In 1845, lots of families came out from different places, right? Tucson, El Paso, right? Along with the Great Migration, it was black and brown. Some people tend to not know that. That's why a lot of us came out. So, but specifically like LA, because we were the industrial complex thing and stuff like that. So I'm really interested. I mean, LA is really important to the history of the industrial complex out there, 1945.
You want to talk about Valley, or you?
We have an hour. I'll just say really quickly that, yeah, I've made work in a lot of different places, and it's about drawing these threads between different places. Specifically, I've made a lot of work in Texas and Mexico and LA, but the work that you're seeing in this show is all made in the San Fernando Valley, which feels like the dark side of the moon, in terms of it's like half of the city of LA, but growing up, I was always told I'm not from LA, so I always thought that was interesting. I was like, but I like the LAPD, the like LA Public Library, I went to LAUSD schools, like, but I think that that is where like we can also disrupt like what are the imaginaries of LA, and also like how is like the neighborhoods that I grew up in. I moved all over, and I lived in different parts of LA, but like being there was like in a way felt like a no place, but yet growing up, passing, like walking home, I would always see like star wagons, and you know, it's literally a giant movie set in a lot of ways. So, and it's, I mean, you would see they'd be making like Freaks and Geeks, and it would be like a show that's supposed to be set in Detroit. So it's always been a painted in this, that it can be, it's like an arbitrary place that can be anything. And I found a sense of freedom in that, and I guess I make my work there too as like, I let that be the backdrop for like real stories, and like people that are always written out of films and written out of like what we experience in the world, but really it's one of the most visible places in the world, yet nobody knows it's that. And so growing up in that shadow has always been kind of a way I've responded to it, but also like has been, there's been also a sense of freedom in it too, because I feel like there's not a specific identity placed upon it. I mean, there's all these tropes about the Valley Girl and all that, and they're talking about like rich white girls like along Ventura Boulevard, but you know, it has like probably one of the most influential accents in the world, you know, but there's just a lot that I could say about the Valley and unpack it, but I also read like, again, like some of my family as being like people that are influencing the world, and that, you know, there's culture being extracted from them, and us, you know, but we're definitely written out of the credits in that sense.
I was gonna pivot to teaching. Okay. So I want to pivot in our remaining time to ask about those of you that teach. How has teaching, and this is a big question, so we can make it smaller, but I'm just curious. How has being in the classroom inspired you, helped shape your work? You know, I think about Christina is also a teacher and has trained generations of photographers, right? And what has that been in relationship with you? I mean, of course, there's the work and the survival part of it, but there's also, you know, do the values that you instill in your students, or the interests, are they reflected in your practice as well? or what are things that you've learned from your students, whether you're their professor or that you're kind of co-learning or, you know, helping them realize their work, say in the lab or in crit, right? So I'm really curious about, yeah, how does that sort of teaching component shape your practice too?
This one might made me cry. No, well, I was actually one of the very fortunate ones on this panel that actually was taught by Cristina Fernandez. I went to Cerritos College, and actually Ed Heckerman's I gotta give him a shout out to because he was also a great professor, and I feel like I carried both of their practices that were different, but I took a lot, and then after they became mentors. Like it was not just within the classroom, so they were a great support when I left community college, and then I transferred to my undergrad and graduate school. So now as an educator, like I feel that I'm trying to give back the same way that they gave to me, where when I found photography, my life changed. You know, I was one of those like bad students, got bad grades, got kicked out, you know, all that good stuff, because I wasn't committed to what I was studying. I wasn't interested, and photography shifted my way of thinking, and I said I want to be an artist, even though my parents were like, okay, sure, you know, she's going to school, just leave her. So they allowed to, even though they didn't quite understand what that meant, they allowed me because they saw I was passionate about it. So I tried to give that to my students and show them artists that I feel are making very important work, right? I tend to like the contemporary artists, is, you know, and I try to give them a voice so that they have a safe space for themselves, and I think teaching is wonderful. I love it. I teach at Cypress College, by the way.
I'll say, I mean, I've taught like TA like at UC San Diego, but I also taught at Las Fotos Project for like 6 years. And I will say that like going from UC San Diego teaching to like Las Fotos Project, well, it's like I don't really feel like I changed my lesson plans much, or you know, like what, like a lot of the work that I show. I think that the students are just very capable, and it's and make really creative work. And I think you know, they teach me a lot. I think it's all about group effort. I've learned a lot about like what how we can share, how crit is like shared labor together. And mentorship is also important, and it goes both ways, like in terms of like being a good, what is it, the art of being like a good mentor to students. Yeah, I'll just say, I'm just very thankful for like that community specifically. And I think like teens have like, it's just like beautiful to see how like they can express like their interior worlds, and also like the camera can help them navigate and make sense of the world that their lived experiences, and kind of turn it into something that feels tangible, or like that they can more legible for themselves, which is what's most important. Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to work at a community college also. For me, I think it's all about kind of giving back, right? What I got, right? I have Professor Cristina Fernandez, she was my professor. I have another professor at Ekman here, who gave me so much, right? And then they're kind of old school photographers who instilled that in me. And that's a big part of who I am and what I give to the students at community college. Because once they leave the art school, they don't get a lot of that, right? They don't get a lot of technical things. And it's my love of the medium that comes from them that I really push for to do quality, right? And it shouldn't be about technique and megapixels and how clean shit is. But to me, it's very important because of the love I have for the medium, right? So it's something I love and pass down to my kids, right? Our students. And then it's been inspiring, right? It's one thing to show student artists of color, right? But it's important. You got to see it to be it, right? It's different to be in a position to place, to give adjuncts and professors, right, this space to be in front of these students where they're the demographic, right? It's like this is who you could be, right? And so that's huge, right? And then it's also the community of artists that I'm around, right? I'm around teaching photographers all day long, bouncing ideas off. There's one of a colleague I have right here, Fred Bashir, who I'm also bouncing ideas. He's probably the first guy I told about this project, right? To do what you like to do, right? But it's always just to be in conversation, and when I think you leave school, you kind of lose that, right? Not every day I'm constantly around other teaching artists and and that community is important. And then we share that space with our students, right? We include them. We don't like we put this artist, like work next to him in the dark room, right? Look at how he scans, look at how he does. So it's important for us to kind of pass down the way the ones before me or gave me. So to me, it's huge, right? It is.
I think they went out.
You went off? Okay. I got to speak about it. Yeah, so I've been teaching I've been teaching high school kids at California State Summer School for the Arts for almost like 10 years. And that's been a journey because that's a very intense art program. And then I started teaching community college, which has been very life-changing because I also went to ELAC, and those professors at ELAC were my mentors. And then it's interesting now, like, for example, then after all that, I got to work with Laura Aguilar for a long time, and then she became my mentor. So, like, learning from all these different instructors, especially at ELAC instructors that were very vocational, very technical, it helped me in what I do in my practice, but also learning how they taught. I instill that in my students as well. I don't try to be as mean as they were, because, and Star could tell you, like, some of our instructors we had were assholes. I try to teach my students, like, how to be themselves. I try to push them to where they should be. And I put a lot of, like, high standards on them, because if nobody else is gonna do it, they're not gonna do it themselves. And for me, it's like I do expect a lot from them, but then they hate me in the beginning of the semester, but at the end they're like, oh my God, thank you. They push me because no other instructor's doing that. Everybody else is kind of easy breezy, kind of nice, and just passes the students. And then when they come into my class, I'm like looking at their techniques, and I'm like, why don't you know, like, some of the basic stuff that and then you can go and explore. So, and also lectures are a very important thing, because I like to show contemporary artists and where they come from historically, back and forth. So the history of photography does play a very important role in my classes, because some of these students don't even know, like they know Ansel Adams, unfortunately, but they don't know, like, Christine Fernandez, they don't know, like, Osco, they don't know Delilah Montoya, they don't even know Laura Aguilar. And it's like, it's sad, so it's like I'm trying to show that. And even with the high school students, I do the same. So it's been rewarding. Yeah, it can be tough, but at the same time, I do mentor, and I believe in mentorship too. And I've been mentoring a lot of students for the last, like, 15 years, and some of them have gone on to, like, art school, some of them gone on to that, and they're always, like, thankful for, like, you know, being that, like, tough with them, because I know nobody else is gonna do it. So I think teaching has really been beneficial to me, and also in my work.
I'm not a teacher.
Turn off.
Christopher, I've been like a teaching aide or a teaching artist for a really long time. I've been a professor for about like 5 years since I graduated from grad school. I knew, like, ever since community college, I wanted to be an educator. I didn't know, like, something clicked with me. I think especially because, like, a lot of our professors were older white men, you know, were really kind of cruel to a lot of us. Like, they taught us technical skills, but sometimes it could be really harsh. And I was like, I kind of want to be different than that. I'm like an abolitionist. And so there's times where, like, students really trust me on that. At the end of the day, like, when I teach a lot of, like, history classes, I do teach some technical classes depending on the school, but I always appreciate at the end of the semester when my students are like, I learned a lot. Like, I always interweave, like, socio-political stuff that's happening, like the Vietnam War, or just like ethnographs, the beginning of it, how it's racialized and everything. And they're like, why didn't we learn this? Why didn't we learn this in high school? Why is it like being suppressed? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell them when it's like every class. They're like, why did we know this? And I'm like, well, you're learning it now, you know. And they're history majors, they're poli-sci, and then they're like, this is really helping me with my information. So it touches me in that way that I know that that'll go on and help them in their careers, even if they're not artists. And like, yeah, like, images are powerful. They're influential. They've been influencing us from the beginning, and they're not neutral. Images are not neutral, and so like I love all that, you know. And so I think it's like just important. It makes me happy, you know, and I wanted to say it.
Thank you. I think we're at a good point that, yeah, if folks do a little stretch, folks want to ask questions, maybe a couple questions, maybe we could socialize and then ask questions, or?
Let's do the question.
Okay, let's do a few questions and then we can have an informal vibe here together. So are there any questions that folks have for? Yes, and I could probably just pass.
I understand.
Okay.
I just have a quick question, because I see like a lot of black and white photographs. I just wanted to know a little bit about like, what was the decision to shoot in black and white, or use color, style, or preference, and decide what it looked like the body after that system.
So you don't want to tackle this? You want
Okay, I'll say, I'm gonna cut in the line. Sorry, I'll say with some of my work, I was shooting a lot with, Ektachrome color slide film, and that was just kind of a nod to filmmaking and thinking about like, what is it like to see, I guess, our stories and kind of in the same kind of film stock as, Ektachrome.
For myself, a lot of my images are, like if I'm shooting something digital, of course it's in color, but then I make that decision to go into black and white depending on what I saw in a movie or if I was inspired by a movie. So a lot of the 3 images right there that I have up there were all inspired by different films that were in black and white. So when I created those images, I tried to match what the vibe of that movie was. So I was really painstakingly trying to match the contrast, the highlight, shadows. So I was very thinking about that.
For me, it's really simple. I just primarily shoot black and white. Just because I develop at home, my process is very slow, and it's just like if I'm spending the extra money on color, am I really going to be using more toxic chemicals in my family's kitchen when they're like cooking? And I've tried shooting color a couple times, and it just sort of becomes like this flat, sort of, or weirdly color balanced sort of flat image that I'm not really interested in. I felt like there was a big period when I was coming into photography where it was just everybody was shooting in the same 4:5 ratio, and it's this sort of like flat, not poorly color balanced, sort of like pseudo-intellectual look that I was just not interested. So I went the complete different opposite. I'm just like, I'm just gonna shoot primarily black and white and be working in a 6x6 film lens. And that's what I've been doing my whole sort of career practice.
Does it also have to do with design perception? The black and white, might have been made 70 years ago. So this idea of playing with the time of the work and perceiving that as part of history.
I mean, yeah, I mean, what we document is gonna end up as part of the history coming. We were talking about this last night. What we're doing now, like we're going to be looked at in the future, and especially like when I'm documenting like this house that I may not live in for the rest of my life because rent's going up so much. Like I'm gonna have these photos of this space or these queer cruising spaces, like a bathhouse, which could potentially be shut down, like the one that was here in downtown LA. So I mean, I guess that's how I sort of think about time, sort of documenting, sort of freezing these people, these places. And I know Christopher was sort of talking about like how people change, people age. Sometimes that can be difficult. Like I know my dad's gonna be getting older. Like he has a hard time looking at his father sort of being like older and weaker.
I think maybe we have time for one more question. If there's a question over there. Where we go? Alex, of course.
I have a real quick question, and you can answer it really short. It's wonderful having so many lens-based photographers. I'm always curious to me to know what photographer, artist, or body of work has inspired you, or a filmmaker or a cinematographer whose film has had like a really inspiring moments and stuff?
So this is always like, people ask me that, it's really funny, because I think photographers inspire me, but I'm like, I've always been in my own head, because I've always been really isolated, or like, I like to be alone for long periods of time. And I like to world build in my head, so I've always liked to dream, I like to dream, but I like to read, and when I read, I world build. Like, I'm really visual in my head, so some images, when I read, I keep saying dream, but like, I don't know, maybe subconscious, because I also dream about when I'm reading. I start to world build, you know, so when I'm thinking about this project, I start to read like cute novels, but I also read like heavy text based on it, and then I world build, like kind of like Inception, like, oh, this is it, and that. And so it's sort of more, I always tell people like, read, like, but not preachy, but I'm like, that's honestly how I get going, is I start to read a lot, like poetry, writers, stuff like that. And then that really inspires me, because when I watch movies or I look at work, I get like overwhelmed, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to copy anybody, or I don't want to, so I'm like, oh, I read a lot, and then I'm like, okay, and then I start to sketch it out, or think like, I need this, or I want to read, and then it's like this whole madness, you know? So for me, it's really like reading stuff, even like short little novels, stuff like that, if that makes sense for me, you know? And that helps not the noise in my head. So that's always been really helpful for me. And there's this book that I read that helped when I was writing my thesis. It was a Lincoln. I'm gonna reread it like today. It's like I don't know, 300 pages or whatever. But it talked all about El Paso and the history of Pachucos and everything like that, and the visuals. So when I read that, like if I'm watching a movie, then I get overwhelmed. But like if I can like think about it, then I'm like, oh yeah, like, you know, then I'm like in my own head, you know. So that's like my jam.
Oh, is it like everybody?
You want to go for
Couple
Okay.
more, couple more
Like,
stuff,
you wanna-
including
Let me interject here, though, we've got about 10 minutes, so if you can go a little bit faster through this question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of silly, but the photo book that really like got me going into photography was Larry Clark's Tulsa, just because I was like, well, he's doing the extremities of his everyday life. I was like, the banal of my everyday life can be interesting as well. But I mean, now that I'm sort of into it, the one that I'm constantly looking back at is Peter Hujar.
Yeah, I'm gonna say the three artists that inspired me mostly, and I wrote them in my master thesis, was Laura Aguilar, Ricardo Valverde, and Willie Middlebrook.
Yeah, I got a Ricardo Valverde too. He was life-changing when I saw his show at VFAM. Dina Lawson, currently Milk Robovin. It's artists that I think do it for a long time and do it for not to be kind of art stars, or just do it just to kind of.
Did you just say both of them and Teresa Harrison's work? Yeah. Yeah. Just FYI.
There's a lot of, I mean, movies and photographers. I think a lot of them are just my friends. But I guess I want to give like Star her flowers a little bit. And for me, like your thesis show, I think that for me, I didn't have a lot of like, I guess, examples of ways that we could really delve into like work around like our families and our mothers in a way that felt so like careful and also like really like activating like the archive in a lot of ways. And so I just really remember your thesis show as being something that was really impactful for me. And so, I don't know, yeah, I'll start off.
So for me, from when I was making my book, the work that was really important to me was Nan Goldman's Ballad of Sexual Dependency, for a lot of reasons. And for the work actually that's on the wall, I would say Adrienne Piper's. I've been collecting her hair, nails, things like that. So I think that's definitely an influence.
That was a great last question, Alex. Thank you. And thank you all for doing this. Please connect and support and celebrate these artists on this panel. Follow them on Instagram, support their work. If you got money, buy their work, or tell a friend about their work. I really think that this is a special group. So thank you for joining us today.